Today I'm just going to do a short presentation on research I've been undertaking with Dóchas, Irish Research Council funded New Foundations research on ethical communications in global development. Many of you who know me would know that I've been working on this area for many years, and also that I published a report on this in 2021. That research, which is available freely online, looked at kind of, I suppose, the state of play with what was called the Dóchas Code of Conduct on Images and Messages back at that time. And this research is a much smaller piece of research, and it looks at the training and learning needs around ethical communications among people within non-governmental organisations, in particular in Ireland. But many of you, though some of you are not working directly with NGOs, many of you are familiar with all of these issues. And basically today, I just want to give you a little bit of feedback, just give you a little bit of background. There's that report that I mentioned earlier on. If you just Google it, you can find it freely available online for anybody who's interested and hasn't seen it before. For many years, since back since the 1990s, there was a code of conduct on images and messages around how not to stereotype, how to ensure that the kinds of messaging, the kinds of images that NGOs were using in discussions or in their communications around development, that these were non-stereotypical, that they were, respectful, etc. So, as I say, in 2021, I carried out this research, and it highlighted a number of recommendations for Dóchas in particular, being the network of NGOs, to review and update the code. And that was done in a new guide, which was published in 23. And then various recommendations around deep and broad education and training and learning, which of course would be of interest to you, but is also the subject of the research I've been doing this year. That's an image there of the front of the new Dóchas Guide to Ethical Communications. It's very interesting. The values that are outlined there in this new guide are the same as those in the previous code, many of you will be familiar with. There's very little in this new guide on training. In fact, hardly anything. And at the end, though, it does say that organisations agree to take part in annual training information sessions on ethical communications, the guide and accompanying resources organised by Dóchas. And it was this kind of absence, if you like, of an exploration around the training and learning needs to deeply embed those values of respect, equality, solidarity and fairness in organizations and in their communications practices. It was the absence of a focus on that really drew me to approaching Dóchas to see if we might look at doing some research around what are organizations actually doing in training and learning, what approaches are they taking, what needs do they have, and what recommendations would that suggest for Dóchas. So today, just in this session, I'm just going to give you a brief summary of findings from a small survey I conducted in April, some of the issues emerging, and then maybe some discussion after the presentation. Just to say, the survey, as I say, is very small, 25 responses. I did it through Microsoft Forms in conjunction with Dóchas. I feel 25 responses is very small, but I'm told by Dóchas that that's actually quite a lot for some of their surveys. So that's what I'm working with, if you like. But I have had a number of consultation meetings as well, which has augmented the findings. The types of individuals responded and the types of organizations they represent: 56% of them development organizations, 16% large humanitarian, 16% dev ed or GCE, and some of you may have contributed to the survey. And people were are at different levels, mostly from project manager, project section management, senior management. So I'm just giving you some very quick points here. Each of these have more detail attached to them, but I'll present that in a formal report at a later stage. But for now, just some short detail. 56% of those who completed the survey have some role in training. And that in itself was really significant, because one of the key things that emerges from the survey is that we don't really know what organizations are doing around training and learning on ethical communications, on issues around decoloniality, racism, on what organizations call localization, on how to represent complexity and truth in its, I suppose its complexity and all the political dimensions related to that. We don't know what organizations are doing. Even the survey gives us some indication, but not hugely. And you'll see that as we go along. One of the questions that I asked was, how familiar do they think staff within the organization, their organization, are with the new Dóchas guide? Now, this was conducted in February, so, 9 months or so after the publication of the new guide. They said 56% of them, over half, said some are familiar, but others are not. 20%, that's a fifth of staff within their organisation, they feel are, a fifth of those who responded said that most are unfamiliar. 8% said very familiar. So there's some difference then as well between those who have, obviously the organisations are very different. Some are huge organisations with Irish-based staff and international staff. And in some cases, they think Irish-based staff or Ireland-based staff are generally familiar, but most internationals are not. So, again, this is a new guide, but then questions about the level of familiarity with it at this stage. How seriously do they think training and learning is taken on ethical communications? And of course, we can understand and, think about training and learning as related and different things and different depths and levels of training and learning around all of this. The responses were mixed. Some say, that management take it seriously, or it's taken seriously in theory, but that there are time constraints. In practice, very much training seems to be focused on communication staff. We'll see that later, but not so much maybe for others. And then what constitutes training is often based on information about the guidelines. So like handing somebody a copy of what was the code or now the new guide to ethical communications might in some instances constitute training. Or maybe at an event or an induction, people get, half an hour to go through the guide. So it's that kind of thing. Obviously, there are somewhere there's a lot more in-depth training. So who gets a copy of it? Many, particularly specific Irish staff, seem to be getting a copy, but overwhelmingly there was a sense that many people didn't know who gets it or who doesn't get a copy of this new guide. And this emerges here in this particular slide. There you can see that you can ignore in this slide the dark orange, because that's not applicable. So those who receive a copy of the guide only at induction is the light orange. Those who participate in induction training on ethical communications is the light blue, and they don't know what's going on is the dark blue. So you can see overwhelmingly there's a sense of not knowing who gets a copy of the guide, or not knowing who gets a copy of the guide, or, whether or not people get induction training. And I broke up the kinds of staff that people, that were involved in all new Ireland-based staff, specific staff, all new international staff, etc. And of course, in some cases, they're not applicable. And in this slide, you can see that how often do you think the following groups of people participate in training? And in this case, what's important is the dark orange, the light orange, and the grey. So that's where training actually happens, either at induction only. Refreshers every year is the orange, and refreshers every 3 to 5 years is the grey. So you can see there the comms staff are seen to participate in quite a lot of training. Fundraising and marketing staff also seen to participate in quite a bit. Education staff and management a little bit less, and admin staff a little bit less again. Those who participate, who are seen or known to participate in the least amount of training, as mentioned, there are partners, board members, and contractors. Now, this is really significant when you think that, when you kind of understand that many organizations work with lots of contractors, especially around the, taking photographs and video and, lots of contractors for their advertising campaigns, etc. Partners as well, and board members play a significant role in many organizations and make decisions around things, especially board members, arguably. And then that questions about if they don't receive training or do not participate in learning experiences on ethical communications, then where does that leave them in terms of their understanding of these issues? And then the big piece then, of course, is I'm not sure, and that's the dark blue. So again, a lot of people not sure of what's going on. And so this is a big salutary kind of message for Dóchas, and I did a session with Dóchas members yesterday, just around all of this and just highlighting, I suppose, the fact that we don't really know, or lots of people don't know what's happening. So a need for a lot more systematic work on this. So, and then this one is just about how important people think training is for these various groups of people. And you can see that most of them are considered to be, it's training and learning is considered to be very important for most of these groups. I asked a question. I hope I'm not going too fast, but I do want to get through this if you like. I asked a question about the various approaches that those who responded to the survey think are being applied to training and learning. If I had my time over again, I would have asked a lot more questions about this. I wanted the survey to be accessible and piloted it, and one or two people said it was a little bit long, and so I took out a question on this, but I'm sorry now, in some ways I did. When we think about the approaches, I asked people how they would describe the approaches, or how they would categorize them. Global citizenship education, equality, diversity and inclusion, anti-racism, human rights, global justice, intercultural competence training, cultural sensitivity or diversity kind of training, critical literacy, or decolonial learning approaches, etc. And as you can see there, most people said that the one that came closest for them is global citizenship education, and second then equality, diversity and inclusion. But we don't really know much about what that actually means in practice. I suppose my own sense is that the approach that's applied is really, really important. Having said that, we do get some information with reference to the next question, which is, what do you see as most important for effective training and learning on ethical communications within NGOs? And I've just given a sample of the quotations that people had, what they said really in this. And you can see there, one person highlighted the importance of a participatory approach on a regular basis. Another, critical literacy training, task-based learning over a period of time. So not just a once-off, not just short, superficial training. It has to be practical type training, so giving examples of how to apply it and allowing for discussions. So in that sense, we get a sense of the global citizenship education approach, arguably critical literacy, participatory, practical, allowing for critical engagement. This next one then, drawing attention to the plight of oppressed groups in a way that's sensitive to their dignity, but also placing their voices in a manner that facilitates solidarity over charity. So that would be very congruent with a global citizenship education approach, one might say. Then from a practical point of view, a long day workshop, practical guidelines. And again, you can see this in the next kind of set of examples around all of that, should be promoted as best practice, annual refreshers, keeping a focus on the delivery of ethical communications, high enough standard. So practical, easily accessible, participatory workshops, not just information based. So that gives us some idea of what people feel actually works or is really important. I asked a set of questions around themes, and I'm not going to go into any great detail here on this. But basically, the message coming back was that all themes are important. And I gave a set of issue-based themes, such as human rights, context, people telling their own stories, issue-based themes on the one hand, alongside kind of, I suppose, kind of applied based themes on another. Like, should it be about social media? Should training focus on humanitarian contexts, etc.? So in the issue-based themes, human rights context and people telling their own stories came out highest, though most themes came out quite high, alongside child protection, informed consent, and ethical considerations in humanitarian situations. I thought it was very interesting, though, that people are much more focused on process and not necessarily on theme. And then in terms of the practice of and the organization and facilitation of training and learning around ethical communications within organizations, within Dóchas member organizations who are participated in the survey, 60% said they were facilitated in-house, 40% said they developed their own training materials, and 40% of them state that training is designed around the Dóchas code. One of the downsides of organizations presenting their own or developing their own materials is that often these are kept in-house and they're not shared. So that's one of the purposes of the research, is to develop a hub, a resource hub on the Dóchas website, where resources can be shared. And if any of you have resources, anybody either here at the session or anybody watching the video, if you have resources, you can contact Niall at Dóchas and those resources might be made available to others. So I think that's one of the losses around this area in recent years, is that a lot of the resources that were freely available in the past have kind of become dissipated. So what kind of resources are people developing? What are they using? This is a big question. I asked a question about that in the research and didn't get a terrible lot of information. So again, if anybody has any information on that, please, I'd be really grateful if you could contact me about it. Only 30% of the training and learning that's undertaken around this issue, people said, was evaluated. Now, that's obviously a very low percentage. And only 20% state that their organization has a training and learning plan for ethical communications. So they obviously have training and learning plans around HR and EDI and all of that, but not specifically around ethical communications. So again, we don't know what people are doing, what they plan to do, and it's kind of ad hoc then. And then in most cases, people didn't know whether or not their partners or local staff contribute. And these are the findings in relation to each of those points that I mentioned there. So what organizations do well? Again, I asked people what they think they do well, and lots of different points came up. Some provide the guide to newcomers, some think they do child protection well, some feel their discussion of stereotyping is good. Applying a visual literacy approach came up once or twice, having good examples, for example, in one case from local staff in Kenya, having their own guide. So some people see that as an advantage, because, you know, it kind of, I suppose, links the principles of the guide to an organization's own practice, and raising awareness of the importance of this issue, and space for in-house experts to contribute, and thorough training for some staff. Of course, the research in 2021 highlighted that an awful lot more needs to be done to embed critical approaches to all of this, whether decolonial or anti-racism approaches to communications within organizations. So even when things are being done well, arguably there's an awful lot more that needs to be done. So what did respondents to the survey say could be done better, or what do they need? So again, I've tried to synthesize a whole pile of data here. So around training and learning, all of these points came up. They need that organizations need more training and learning, regular refreshers, etc. Any training and learning needs to be a lot more structured, clearer plans and more systematic delivery. It needs to be broader, integrating kind of, you know, contemporary issues like populism, or in this case, social media, anti-racism, and a lot more deeper training experiences, more organization-wide training and learning on ethical communications. Of course, we know that there are deeper learning experiences available online, but sometimes these are not, people are not aware of them, or then, this time is not given for them. And then what can people do within organizations themselves? So that's, that like says there's an awful lot of work to do around peer-to-peer sharing of experience and good practice. People find those experiences very good, and Dóchas have started to work on those since the publication of the new guide. So some people want, you can see quotes there. Individuals said these: there should be a way for members to share their learning to help each other to improve. Everybody should be involved in the conversation. Partners and others can help through sharing examples of ethical communications and opening conversations and debates around imaging. So there's, there are opportunities now developing for this, and, obviously within Dóchas, but even here now, and this idea, knowledge share, arguably is another opportunity for it. So the development and sharing of resources to support training. So lots of people felt that the more resources that can be shared, the better. And I put it to them about this idea of an online resource hub, and most people were very much in favour. So lots of talk about the need for more practical workshops and training and learning. And then when asked what they would find most useful to support all of this, and I asked them to tick all that apply, basically the same messages were coming up. So it's a reinforcement of these points: training of trainers, more training available, and an online hub of resources. And then I asked a question about the role for Dóchas. And of course, obviously, it's useful to think about IDEA as well in terms of for IDEA members. And what people came back with was regular workshops, again, reinforcing those points: peer sharing experiences, training of trainers, taking a lead and being more visible, providing resources, the development of particular guides, training materials, etc. The hub that I mentioned for sharing resources and engaging with management, regular communications and refreshers on this issue. So lots of work to be done, lots of suggestions coming out. Still, I would suggest that there's a need for more research, more systematic research on it. And, that in itself is, I suppose, a role perhaps for Dóchas to support that in the future. So in terms of my presentation, that's it. Just like to reiterate, thanks very much for listening or for watching. And just to reiterate, if you have any questions or anything you'd like to contribute to the research, please don't hesitate to contact me. My email is eilish.dillon@mu.ie. Thanks again.